Hey, I'm Max and welcome to this Unreal Engine 5 beginner tutorial. By the end of this tutorial right here, you should have a simple game like this where you can jump on cubes, you can reach the checkpoint to have a cool particle effect, you have a cube that moves around and you can jump on it and move with it, you have over here a fake cube that you can just walk right through it, and a cube that goes invisible and visible every couple of seconds. You can also die if you hit the spikes, and when you hit retry, you go back to your last checkpoint. If you enjoyed this tutorial, feel free to subscribe. Okay, so we already have our character imported as the third person character, but you can see when we move around, that character doesn't do any animation. And that's because if you go in the third person character, go on the mesh, you can see over here animation, use animation blueprint, that's okay, but then animation class, none. We could do over here, for example, use animation asset and then set an animation like the crush animation, compile, and then our character would just repeat that over and over. But that's not what we want either. So to have different animations play depending on the state of the player, like if he's moving or not, we need to use an animation blueprint. For this, we need to go in our content drawer and then right click, go to animation and add a animation blueprint. Then we select the character we want, the skeleton we want, so in my case it's male character, okay, and then we give it a name. As usual, we start with ABP for animation blueprint, underscore, and then we call it whatever we want. So in my case, I'll just use player. So now if I open it, you can see over here, it is the output pose. And as usual with Unreal Engine, we can right click and add some nodes. So if over here I search for sprint and I put my sprint, I can just drag it in and I put it in my output pose, compile. Then I need to make sure to go on my third person character and select that animation class over here, ABP player. If I don't do it, it's not going to just know to use this one. Then compile as usual, save, and now if I play, you can see it's going to use the sprint animation all of the time as well. But here in this ABP, we can do different things like blend between poses and also change depending on some conditions. In our case though, we don't really need any condition, we just want it to be idle when we're not moving and then blend towards running when we're moving. So you can go in your content drawer and then right click, go to animation and then blend space 1D. If you use blend space normal, it's going to have 2 dimensions, and in our case we just want the animation to blend depending on the speed, so just the speed is 1D. But if you use blend space 2D, you just don't use the second one, it's fine too. So blend space male character, then I'm going to call PS for blend space, underscore, player run, then we can open it, double click, and we can have over here a blend space, which is going to blend between 2 animations depending on a value. So over here to the left, we have our axis setting. Here we can give a name to our axis, I'm just going to call it speed. We can give it a minimum, so 0 is fine, and a maximum is 100 by default. But if I show you this real quick in the third person character movement, you can see walking max speed is 600. So I'm going to go in my blend space and set the maximum to 600. So now we have a blend space over here where we can put different elements from our animations over here. We have it based on the speed from 0 to 600. So what I'm going to do is search for the idle. And in my case, I have multiple idle ones. So if I hover over it, I can see the full name. Aiming idle, flying idle, and just idle. So this is the one I want. And I'm going to drag it to the left over here at 0. And then I'm going to search for sprint. So this is the sprint. I'm going to drag it to the right. And now I can see the idle to the left and the sprint to the right. And if I hold shift, I can move this cursor over here. And you can see the more I move to the right, the more it starts sprinting. So this way, instead of being like this and then snapping to sprinting, which looks terrible, it's going to do a little gradient between the two, a little blend between the two, and it's going to look a lot nicer. So now that I have my blend space, I'm going to save it, go back to my animation blueprint. I can remove this, and now you can see if I go in my assets at the top, my blend space is right here. So I can just drag it in and then put it into the result, compile, and now if I go play, you can see it does not work. And the reason for this is simple. Here we have our speed and it's just set to 0. So how do we update our speed based on our actual character speed? Well, we need to get into the blueprint basics. So you can see over here at the top I have my anim graph and my event graph. And if you don't have the event graph here, you can click on it over here as well. And then if you click on your event graph, you can see a event blueprint update animation and a try get pound owner. So the try get pound owner is going to get the owner of the animation blueprint, so in our case the third person character, and the update animation event is going to be called every frame. So those little green and blue things are like variables like we saw in the material earlier, and we can drag off of it and get a node. And the little white thing here is a pin for execution, so it's going to execute the next one after this. So first we need to create a new variable for the speed to be able to put it over here. So you go down to the variables at the bottom left and hit the plus. Then you can simply put a name. I'm going to put speed, and you can change the type right here, or you can go for more settings at the top right. Then you can change the name, the type. In our case it's a float we need, which means a value with decimals. If we use an integer, it's going to be just whole numbers like 1, 2, 3, and float can be 1.5. So first we need to get the velocity of the player before setting it in our variable. So I'm going to drag off try get pound owner and then search for velocity, get velocity. Then I'm going to drag from the vector and then search for length, because we need the length of the vector of the velocity. And now I need to set this as my speed value, so I can drag off this and search for set speed, which is going to be my variable over here. Or you can drag the speed into the event graph, click set, and then drag this little pin here. And now a very important step is to drag the execute pin from the animation event to the execute pin from the set. If you don't do this, it's not going to execute. And now just to show you, you don't have to do this also, but I'm going to drag another one from the other pin, type print string, and simply drag this over here, and it's going to convert it to a string to print it, and that's going to print the value on the screen, but you don't have to do this. Next, make sure to go in your anim graph, drag the speed, get the speed, so you just drag it from the variables to the event graph, get speed, and then drag it in the blend space. So to resume, every frame we are going to get the velocity of the pound owner, so the player. We are going to get the size of the velocity, set it at as the speed, and then in the anim graph we put the speed into the blend space, which is going to return us a blend between idle and sprinting. So now if we compile that and then save it, we can go into our game. And now if I start running, you can see the values change in the print, and you can see the animations blend. So you can see if I start running a little bit, it just starts running for a little bit and it doesn't just snap to the sprint. So congratulations, you've done your first animation blueprint in Unreal, or maybe your first. Okay, so now I'm just going to remove the print string so it doesn't just fill the screen, compile. And I don't know if you remember, but when we imported the meshes, we had a mesh for the character hair, like this. But you can see that our character over here does not have any hair. So to add the mesh, we just have to click on the skeletal mesh, and then click add, and then add, once again, a static mesh. Not a static mesh simulation or anything else, really just static mesh. And you can see by default, in my case, it put the hair already. But if it didn't, you just have to put the hair here and it should work. But you can see one big problem if I just leave it like this. When I run around, the hair doesn't follow the head. It's just a static mesh, so it doesn't move, right? So how do you make it follow the hair? Well, you need to put a socket. So if I open my content drawer, I go in the skeleton, male character skeleton, or if you can't find it for any reason, you can go on your mesh, double click on the skeletal mesh right here, the image, it's going to open it up. And then you can click on the skeleton and it's going to open that up as well. So once you're in the skeleton, you can go on your head or whichever bone you want. In my case, it's the head. Right click, add a socket. It's going to give it a default name, that's fine. And then to place your socket correctly, you need to add a preview mesh to see where it's at. So in my case, add a preview mesh and then add the hair. And you can see my hair is not at the right position. So I need to rotate my socket by 90 degrees. And if you don't know how to switch between the different tools to move and rotate, they are over here. So this is rotate, scale, and then move. So we rotate by 90 degrees. Then we change to translate. we move it down the z-axis until it's about at the head of our character, so it's still a little bit above. Let's see, like this. Looks pretty good, maybe a bit more. Okay, like this. So now we can save, and now if we go play, you can see it still doesn't work, and that's because we didn't tell the hair what socket to attach to. So if I go in my third person character, go on the hair, you can see right above the static mesh, the parent socket, none. So I'm going to click on the browse and then click on my head socket that I just created. And now you can see it snapped to it, and if I compile, you can see it now follows my head socket. And since the head socket is attached to the head bone, it's going to follow the head bone as well, which is obviously my head. So now we've seen pretty much every basic we need to know. Now we need to get into the little bit more complicated stuff with blueprints behaviors. So let's start by creating another blueprint. First, go to your blueprints folder, then right click, blueprint class, actor, and we'll call it BP_cube. I'm going to open it up. Then just like the spikes, I'm going to add a static mesh. And here in the static mesh, I'm going to search for cube, and I'm going to get the 1 meter cube, which is a mesh from the template. So once I select this, you can see the 1 meter cube appear, but it has a pretty bad material. So if I click on material here, I can see all of these materials that come from the starter content, which is why I said we needed to add it to our project when we created it. If you don't have the starter content, that means you didn't add it to your project, so you can either create another project or just use the default material, that's fine too. So in my case, I'm just going to use the brick lane new over here, and you can see the material is pretty good. So now if I compile and save, I can go back to my scene. I can remove all of the template stuff. So in my case, I prefer to remove all of the template stuff. So you can see over here, the arena has walls and floors. I'll keep that, but the walkway over here is the little thing over here in the middle of the map. So I'm just going to delete that. And I'm also going to delete this cube. I'm going to delete this documentation actor and this text. So you can just click on it and click delete on your keyboard. And then I'm going to drag in my BP cube, raise it a little bit. And you can see now if I hit play, I can jump on it and I stay on it. Also, if you want to duplicate something in your map, you can drag it from the content viewer again, or you can right click and then go to edit duplicate. Or also a little trick, you can hold Alt with your keyboard and then drag, and it's going to duplicate it and then drag it to wherever you want. So if you want to create a bunch of cubes quickly, you can just hold Alt and then drag, and it's going to make some new ones. And over here in the editor, you can change some settings to things you place in the world, such as the scale and of course the location, to make it however you want. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to create child blueprints that will create different behaviors for a similar object. So let's say I want to create a cube that moves around back and forth between two locations. Well, I could just go and create a new actor for moving cube, but then if I change something on the cube like the material, it's not going to change for the other ones. And also I will need to add back my static mesh and my material every time I create a new one. So since they're going to be similar except the moving cube is going to have an additional feature, I can right click on the BP cube and go at the top, create child blueprint class, then call it BP moving cube. Then I can open it up and you can see it already has the static mesh with the material and everything. And you can see in parentheses it says inherited, which means it comes from the parent, which is the cube right here. Now I can add to that cube something else to make it different from the basic cube. In our case, we want to add a movement, and in my case I want to add the interp2 movement, which is going to move between a series of points. I can just leave the default name for the component. And now if I compile and I go in my scene, add a moving cube, let's say right here, like this, and I'll also delete this wall to make sure it has space. So you can see if I add my moving cube right here, it looks just like the other ones, and it doesn't do anything special yet. But if I go in my moving cube and I add 2 control points in the control of the interp2 movement, which is just a component made by Unreal, I can then open the 2 points and then set the first one to -300 Y and 300 Y for the other one. So it's going to move between those 2 points over a duration of, let's say, 3 seconds. Compile, and now if I open this and play, you can see now our cube is moving between 2 points, but it stops right here because of the settings. So if I go back to my interrupt to movement, I can go down here on behavior and change the behavior type to ping pong, which is going to have it repeat back in the reverse order when it reaches the end. So now you can see it will ping pong between those 2 locations, and we just created a child blueprint. And you already saw that when we created a moving cube as a child, we didn't have to add back the static mesh, so that's already good. But you can see that also if I change over here my material to something else and then hit compile, you can see they all change. All of the cubes change, and also all of the child of the cube change. So that's going to save you a lot of time if you use the child feature correctly. Let's do another example to be sure. So I'm going to right click on my BP cube, create a child blueprint, call it BP fake cube, and I will show you that not only can you add new things, so you can see this one is just like the cube again. It doesn't have the interrupt to movement because that's the moving cube. So you can see this one is just like the cube we had before, and now I can add other things like I did with the moving cube, but I can also edit the things that are already here. So I can edit, for example, the material to something else, and I can also go, for example, in the physics collisions, change it to no collision, compile, and now if I drag this fake cube over here, you can see it has a different material. And also if I hit play and I jump on it, you will see that it will have no collisions. So when you create a default class, you can then create child and add new things like we did with the moving cube, or change things like we did with the static mesh over here of the cube, change the collision or the material. And again, if for some reason I change, for example, the static mesh from the cube to a hair, for whatever reason, you can see they all change to the hair as well. Thanks for watching this part. If you followed along, you should have learned how to do some animations and some basic blueprint behaviors, as well as how to make parent and child blueprints. In the next part, we will get started on actual game mechanics and also do a little bit of UI. So stay tuned.